In the Middle East, two sides are clashing over a piece of land right here. The Arabs and the Jews are in a state of conflict over who should get the sliver that's just west of Jordan. Then, the United Nations intervenes and makes a state for the Arabs called Palestine and one for the Jews called Israel. It's been 30 years since the same land was under the control of an empire, and now acts of violence are being committed on both sides to claim it. With the British mandate ending there, the Jews are ready to claim their own independence, but something happens. Its Arab neighbor countries suddenly declare war on Israel, marking the beginning of a decades-long struggle for power. At the height of World War I, the Ottoman Empire is on the verge of collapse in Middle Eastern Europe. Ruling for over 6 centuries, its decline is accelerated by a destructive fight with Russia. As the Central Powers are pushed in, the empire has an internal genocide. Over 1 million ethnic Armenians are executed for suspicion of aiding the Russians. By 1922, the Ottoman Empire had been completely diminished, leaving behind many different countries and regions. Those regions include people with different religions, such as Jewish, Muslims, and some Christians. Each had religious ties here, especially to the city of Jerusalem. The Jews sought help from the British in creating an independent state for themselves. Back in 1917, they publicly announced this in the Balfour Declaration. His Majesty's government viewed with favor the establishment in Palestine of a national home for the Jewish people, and will use their best endeavors to facilitate the achievement of this object. However, a year before that, Britain had made an agreement with the French to carve out the Middle East regions in the Sykes-Picot Agreement. They imposed their influence in their respective regions, but Britain also decided to take a small piece on the coast of the Mediterranean, called the British Mandate of Palestine. The two sides then engaged in acts of violence against each other throughout the 1920s and 30s, and even fought against British rule as well. In response to all of this, Britain limited Jewish immigration to British Palestine. However, this was a time when many were in desperate need to escape to there, because this was during the Holocaust. The Second World War was underway, and Nazi Germany began capturing ethnic Jews and sending them to concentration camps. Eventually, Britain had enough, and in 1947, 2 years after World War II ended, they withdrew, ending the British Mandate of Palestine. Shortly after, the United Nations decided to divide British Palestine for the Jews and for the Arabs. Each would have their own states called Israel and Palestine. There was also an international state for Jerusalem, since both the Arabs and the Jews had religious ties there. However, when the Jews officially declared their independence on May 14, 1948, neighboring Arab states such as Egypt and Iraq declared war on Israel the next day. This had came about as the Arabs wanted to strive for a unified state of their own in the Palestinian land. Outnumbered, it seemed as the Jews were going to lose against the giant Arab states. However, even with lesser troops, they were more organized and equipped, and so the First Arab-Israeli War ended in a Jewish victory. In the aftermath of the 1948 war, the Jews had gone past the UN plan. They had gotten some land that was meant for Arab Palestine, but also some land that was in West Jerusalem. However, in June 1967, another war erupted, the Six-Day War. Again, Israel had gained the upper hand, and so, as a result, they had also taken even more Arab lands. They now had the Golan Heights from Syria, the West Bank from Jordan completely unifying Jerusalem, and the Gaza Strip and the Sinai Peninsula from Egypt. However, just over a decade later, Egypt and Israel agreed to the Camp David Accords, which saw the return of the Sinai Peninsula. Still, much of the Palestinian land was under control of Israel, which only created more tension. In 1987, the Palestinians launched the First Intifada, which is the Arabic word for uprising. This originated in the Gaza Strip, which was one of the Palestinian lands that Israel took over from the Six-Day War. The uprising mainly consisted of protests, but also violence, with the Israel military stepping in, which brought about over 1,000 Palestinian casualties. It was clear that both sides would take any means necessary to try to keep or take power. Then, In 1922, the Oslo Accords were signed, which attempted to bring peace back together with Israel and the Palestinians. But it didn't work, as the violence had persisted into a second intifada. From 2000 to 2005, there were even more casualties than the first one. As the world rolled into the 21st century, a nationalist Palestinian group called Hamas engaged in bombings and attacks determined for the destruction of Israel. They continuously fight against their oppressors, but even today, the Palestinians are still in a struggle. And as long as this keeps happening, the Arab-Israeli conflict still goes on.